Hi everyone, it's Karen from Karen's Quilts, Crows, and Cardinals blog and Redbird Quilt Co. Here tonight with another installment of our Redbird Quilt Co. 2016 Free Motion Quilt Along. What I'd like to talk about a little bit today is a little bit of setup information, and then we'll do some quick stitching. I'd like to show you a little bit about how I practice or warm up, and it'd be something that maybe you could try at home before we actually start stitching on our Loose Balloons growth chart panel. So let me just quickly tell you, I'm working currently on a Janome Horizon. It's a 7700. It's got quite a good throat space here for the quilt top to move through. On the Janome, what I've found, and this is courtesy of Leah Day, I tried it out when she actually suggested it a few years ago, was to leave my feed dogs up. So I don't actually drop the feed dogs on my machine. I cover them with a piece of template plastic. So I just use a standard old piece of template plastic that you can buy almost anywhere. I used to use cardboard to cover it, and someone suggested that the cardboard may actually get scratched off by the feed dogs moving back and forth. So I switched to the template plastic. I cut a little hole in the template plastic. You'll see that in a picture on my blog. And so I cover my feed dogs instead of dropping them. Now, part of getting your stars aligned would be to consider doing that with your machine as well. If you're experiencing problems with your tension or with just the general quality of your stitch. So my feed dogs are covered. I actually put the blue tape around here such that I can still get in and out of my bobbin casing without actually having to move the feed dog cover. And I also have installed, also you'll see on the blog post, Little Genie magic bobbin washer, and this actually just drops right into my bobbin case. And really the objective is to try to allow the bobbin to handle the quick moves that you're doing with your free motion quilting. So it allows it to move freely underneath the casing as you're quilting along. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on my blog post as well. So I have a little bobbin washer in already, and I have my feed dogs covered. Now ideally you're going to want to use a fine weight thread for most of the stitching that we're going to do. As I mentioned in our How to Quilt That session, I love to use the Aurifil 50 weight thread for most of my dense machine quilting. It's a great thread to have. And a general rule of thumb when you're first starting out, especially with our quilt along, is to use a bobbin thread that matches the color of the top thread. Now you're not going to always be able to do that, but you're going to want to find something that very much complements it. So if you do have tension issues, those tension issues are not going to show up if your bobbin and your top thread are the same color. So right now I have a kind of a bright pink color on so that you can see the stitching that I'm going to do. But another point there, always make sure you go ahead and wind a few bobbins full. Now this is not a good example here, but go ahead and wind a few bobbins full so that as you're moving along and you get your rhythm going, you don't have to worry about stopping and rewinding bobbins. Just go ahead and pop a new bobbin in and keep on moving. So I usually try to wind 2 or 3 bobbins ahead before I get started. So that's a great rule of thumb to go by also. So I have my bobbins ready, my top Aurifil 50 weight thread in. Let's just talk a little bit about needles. There's a lot of choices with needles these days. On my Janome Horizon, it loves the Janome brand needles. I've tried a lot of other needles. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I love a lot of other needles, but sometimes my machine gets fussy and wants Janome brand needles. So I generally with the Aurifil 50 weight can get away with a size 11 needle, which is a 7511. If you go much bigger, it's kind of a waste. You don't really need to go too much bigger, but you can go bigger. But a 7511 will work perfectly fine with a 50 weight thread in your machine. The other needles that I really like are the Superior titanium coated top stitch needles. They're really another great quality brand needle that I have tried. And when I'm not using multiple layers of batting, these Superior needles work really well on my Janome. The other ones, and the ones that I really started out with, are the Schmetz needles, the Microtex Sharps. They actually have worked fine in the past for me as well. So this is another option, something to think about. So needles are always going to be something, another variable, I guess, in getting your stars aligned. You want to make sure that you're using a fresh needle, that it has a sharp point. If there's been any hitting of pins or hitting the plate or anything, bending, pulling, or tugging, you're going to want to change your needle. It's really important to have a good quality needle in there and a fresh needle. So my machine has also recently been cleaned. I would highly recommend that you clean your machine before you start any major quilting project. So I'm going to lay, the other thing I have is a Supreme slider. There's multiple different sizes of sliders, and I'm going to address that on my blog as well. But basically it's just a Teflon sheet that lays down, that allows your fabric swatch to move readily on top of your machine bed. You'll also notice on my blog post that I mentioned I have a machine that's flush with my tabletop. It's hard to show you in this video right now, but I have my dining room table behind my table, my machine table, and I have one of those portable tables off here to the left to hold my quilt top as well. So it's really important, if you can, that you have your machine flush with your tabletop, so that you're not worried about the fabric falling off the edge of the machine bed every time that you move it. So again, I'll show you a few more still pictures of that setup in my blog post, so be sure to refer to that. Now I'm going to get started up. I'm just going to mention that I right now have a closed toe foot on. It's actually just a regular free motion foot, a darning foot, but it has a closed toe. So when you're quilting around applique or anything, wool applique or needle turn applique, it's sometimes best to have a closed toe foot on so that you don't get the open toe caught on your stitches. And this is just an example of the open toe foot. Here's an open toe foot that fits on the Janome Horizon, and you can see how the open toe might actually get caught on stitches as you're stitching past applique wool or needle turn applique. The other foot that I really love, and the foot that I use a lot, even when I'm just free motion quilting, is the Janome 1/4 inch ruler foot. And by 1/4 inch in this case, I mean it's a 1/4 inch, roughly a 1/4 inch tall, and when you stitch in the middle of the ruler foot, it'll keep the ruler a 1/4 inch away from where you're stitching. So it's a nice 1/4 inch measurement. This foot comes in really handy for echo quilting as well. So I do often use this foot. Sometimes the visibility with it is a little less than just your regular small darning foot, but it does come in handy at times. So if you have a ruler foot available for your type of machine, I would highly recommend getting one. And again, I can share more information about that on the blog. So the other thing I have, and I apologize, these are a little bit scruffy, but I'm a firm believer in wearing something on my hands. These are the Machinger's gloves. They're like a garden glove. Basically, they have a kind of a grippy finger to them. They're stretchy. Otherwise, I find that they run big. So if you're going to buy a pair of gloves, like my hands, I think I wear about a size 7 ring. My hands are they're chunky, but they're not all that big. An extra small is very good size for me in the Machinger's gloves. And again, I'll share a little bit more about that on my blog. So I'm going to go ahead, and I would highly recommend that you do this too. Let's do a practice session. In the practice session, for those of you that are brand new to free motion quilting, for those of you that have been quilting right along, then maybe this is going to be a repeat for you, and I apologize. And I also want to point out that there's no exact right or wrong. I'm just sharing with you my methods, the things that I use that have worked for me, but there are so many other ways of doing things. There's no right or wrong. So if you have another way for you to do it, then, or another way that you've learned and it works for you, that's really what's most important. But let me just go ahead and get started. I'm going to, every time I free motion quilt, I always bring my bobbin thread to the top. So I'm going to drop my foot down. I'm going to hold on to my top thread, and I'm going to go down and up with my needle. I'm basically going to do one cycle of the needle, and as you hold on to that top thread, when you go take a cycle with your needle, you're going to actually, if you pull on it, you're going to see the bobbin thread come through. So I usually just go ahead and nab that bobbin thread and pull it up, and now they're both on the top. I don't know if you can see that well, but they're both on the top of my little quilt sandwich. So for our quilt along, I'm just going to show you at this point how to lock your stitches, which is basically just taking a couple of stitches in place will lock your stitches, and then we're going to trim our extra threads flush with the quilt top and get them out of the way. Now, if we were doing a show quilt or something that you're going to enter in a juried or a judged show, you probably would not do what I'm showing you now. You would actually leave these threads dangling here, push them out of your way, and then later on you would bury them in the quilt sandwich. Okay, so I just want to point that out. This is just a shortcut for beginners to get started quilting and not having to worry too much about the threads being in your way as you're learning as you go. So we're gonna trim these off for now. Later on I'll trim them flush, but I just want to get them out of the way. Another thing that's really important, if your machine has it, is to always quilt with your needle in the down position. So the Janome has that option. I can press that button and tell my machine, every time I stop sewing, leave the needle in the down position. And what that does for you is it allows you to stop and not worry about your hands pulling your quilt sandwich out of the way. Your needle will basically lock your quilt sandwich in place. So those are a few of the basics to get started. What I've done is I've made a quilt sandwich that it's very similar to what we're going to be quilting on the Lose Balloon growth chart panel. But I think one great way to get started practicing and to check your tension and to check your setup is to go ahead and write your name or practice your name. So I'm just going to do that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and draw Karen. Don't worry about backtracking. Don't worry about how pretty it looks. This is going to look a little bit odd with this bright pink thread on the white muslin, but I'm going to write Karen on here. Writing your name is a great way of starting out. I'm not sure if you can see that or not. Let's see, can I bring that in a little bit? There you go. Yeah, you can see it now. Do you see how I'm going ahead and I'm just going to write my name? Now, you can scribble around that a little bit, but go ahead and practice writing your name. Write your name over and over again. That's a great way to learn how to move the quilt sandwich underneath your needle and machine. Now, I'm just going to go ahead here and just do a couple loops myself. Again, just getting used to the way the machine and the thread and the fabric all work together. I'm just doing some big loops, and sometimes I refer to these as loop-de-loops. You'll see that in my discussion on the How to Quilt That post. Now I'm just going to go ahead and just keep doing that. So I'm going to get back over here to the beginning. You don't have to worry about going too fast. And I actually wouldn't worry too much about my stitch length right now. And I didn't baste this piece at all, so you'll see that I'm going to get a little bit of puckers here and there. So loop-de-loops are another great thing to practice, but I'm going to work my way back down underneath my name and quilt it again. And I would highly recommend that you do the same thing. Go ahead and get yourself a fabric swatch and use cursive and write your name. Don't worry about if you have a T, then backtrack at the T way at the top and cross it. But it's really good practice to go ahead and do that. So that's what I would recommend that you do right away until we actually start quilting the panel. In our next lesson, I will throw the panel on and we'll begin stitching. And like I mentioned in the quilt along how to quilt that session, I'm going to go ahead and top stitch with an Aurifil 12 weight thread. I'm going to top stitch along just inside of that black border that we've put on the panel. And in that case, I'm going to set my thread length very long, like probably a 3/5, and I'm going to use a larger needle, but we'll talk about that in the next session. For now though, if you're brand new to quilting, take some time this weekend and go ahead and get just a fabric swatch, a practice swatch, and with batting, make sure you have the batting that you're using for your session, for your Loose Balloons growth chart in there, because that helps you evaluate your tension. When you're done, I'm just going to flip through this. Always look at the back of your quilting and make sure that you don't have eyelashes back here. If you're going too fast or your tension is a little bit off, sometimes you'll see actually a pull where the bobbin thread is not being pulled taut. So you'll see the bobbin thread actually stretching back here. So be sure to always, when you first start out, check the back of your fabric and make sure that your tension looks good there as well. And by tension looking good, I guess the general rule of thumb is you want that top and the bobbin thread, that where it connects, to be buried inside of your fabric swatches. You don't want them to be showing on the top or the bottom. If you're not sure about that, take a close-up picture of it and send it to me, or post it on Facebook, or put a comment on my blog, send me an email. You can send emails to redbirdquiltco@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to reply back with my thoughts on that. But anyhow, for this weekend, get started doing some practice sandwiches. Write your name, maybe try some loop-de-loops, do a little bit of a scribbling, but the goal is to test your tension and to get your hands kind of comfortable with moving the fabric. And you'll notice that most of the time when I'm moving my fabric, I don't necessarily lay my hand flat. Sometimes I'll just use my fingertip. I often pull my elbows off of the table. If your elbows are resting down on the table, it's hard to get a nice smooth movement of the quilt sandwich. So don't allow your elbows to rest on the table. Just one more little tip. Okay, for now we're going to sign off. You don't need to be stitching on your Loose Balloon growth chart panel yet, unless you really are anxious to get going. That's fine, but just hold tight. We'll be doing stitching on that the next time we meet, and I appreciate you stopping by. We're really looking forward to getting going here. I hope everybody's excited, and we'll have some fun with it. Thanks for stopping by. It's Karen from Karen's Quilts, Crows, and Cardinals blog and Redbird Quilt Co.